At my daughter's wedding, my best friend of 40 years gave a beautiful toast to my perfect marriage. Moments later, another guest stood up and exposed the truth. My best friend had been sleeping with my husband for a decade. She was just one of 7 women in that room who had been with him. My perfect life wasn't just a lie, it was a public spectacle, and I was the only one not in on the joke. Dear friends, your comments and support mean the world to us. Tell us, what challenges have you faced in life, or maybe you're facing right now? Like this video and write where you are watching us from. We will be happy to send you our regards. At 62, you believe the architecture of your life is complete. The foundation, laid in the optimism of youth, has long since settled. The walls, built from shared laughter, quiet sacrifices, and the mundane mortar of daily life, are solid. The roof, a canopy of memories, is weathered but strong, designed to shelter you from all but the most catastrophic of storms. My name is Seraphina Vance, and on the day of my daughter's wedding, I was standing in the grand cathedral of my life, admiring the stained glass windows of my achievements, completely unaware that the pillars were rotten to the core and the entire structure was about to collapse upon my head. The day was flawless, a perfect jewel of a late September afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina. The air was crisp, carrying the sweet, decaying scent of autumn leaves and the expensive perfume of my daughter's 200 guests. Our home, a sprawling Tudor-style house we'd lived in for 30 years, was the stage. And the heart of the stage, the absolute centerpiece, was my garden. It was my life's other great project, a meticulously curated masterpiece of color and texture. Roses, bred for their vibrant hues and intoxicating fragrance, climbed the old stone walls. Hydrangeas, in shades of deep blue and violet, formed lush, cloud-like borders. Every petal, every leaf was in its perfect place. The garden was a reflection of my life with my husband, Harrison. Beautiful, orderly, and a testament to years of patient, loving cultivation. Or so I believed. Harrison was across the lawn the perfect host, a silver-haired, handsome man in a bespoke tuxedo. He moved through the crowd with an easy, practiced charm, a drink in one hand, the other resting warmly on a guest's shoulder. He was a pillar of our community, a successful investment banker known for his sharp mind and his even sharper philanthropic instincts. But to me, he was the architect of my world, the man whose love had been the blueprint for my entire adult life. He caught my eye from across the sea of smiling faces and raised his glass in a silent toast, his familiar, reassuring smile sending a wave of warmth through me. How could I have known that this man, my husband of 40 years, was a master architect of a different kind, a builder of secret, hidden worlds, a man whose foundations were sunk deep into a bedrock of lies? How could I have known that the toast he offered was not a celebration of our family, but a farewell to the illusion he had so masterfully maintained for decades? The truth, when it comes, is rarely a gentle dawn. On this day, it would be a lightning strike, a violent, brutal illumination that would burn my entire beautiful garden to the ground. Our story was the kind people envied. We were the Vances, a name synonymous with stability and quiet success. Harrison and I had met in college, 2 ambitious, bright-eyed kids who saw in each other a shared vision for the future. Our marriage was a partnership, a 40-year conversation that had, I thought, never faltered. We had weathered financial downturns, the death of our parents, the turbulent teenage years of our daughter, Nia. Through it all, our bond was the constant, the unshakable center. He was my confidant, my champion, the man who still brought me a cup of coffee in bed every morning, just the way I liked it. He was a man of grand gestures and quiet intimacies. For our 25th anniversary, he'd surprised me with a trip to Paris, a whirlwind of romance that felt like a scene from an old movie. But it was the small things I cherished more. The way he'd always saved me the last piece of the dark chocolate we both loved, the knowing glance we'd share across a crowded room, the comfortable silence as we read, side by side in the evenings. This was the man I knew, a man of integrity, of deep and abiding love, the man I had built my life around. To even conceive of another Harrison, a shadow self living a life of deceit, was an impossibility, a violation of the fundamental laws of my own universe. Our daughter, Nia, was the culmination of our love, the living embodiment of our shared life. She was a bright, ambitious young woman, a lawyer with her father's sharp intellect and my passion for detail. Her wedding to a wonderful young man named Caleb was the capstone on our family's story, the perfect, happy ending that all parents dream of for their children. She was a vision today, a radiant bride in a dress that shimmered like captured moonlight. As she moved through the garden, greeting guests, her laughter was the soundtrack to my perfect day. But even in the midst of this flawless joy, there was a subtle, discordant note, a flicker of something just out of sync. I noticed it in the way some of the women looked at Harrison. I had always attributed it to his natural charisma. Women had always been drawn to him, but today the look seemed different. Less like admiration and more like possession. There was a knowingness in their eyes, a shared secret history that I was not privy to. I saw him talking to a group of women, wives of his business partners, and the laughter seemed a little too loud, his hand lingering a little too long on one woman's arm. I dismissed it, as I always did, as a product of my own quiet insecurities. It was just Harrison being Harrison, the charming, life-of-the-party host. It was a comforting, familiar lie I told myself, a protective layer of varnish over a truth I was not yet ready to see. The cracks were there, but I had spent years polishing them until they were invisible, even to myself. Among the guests was my best friend, Jocelyn. Our friendship was a 40-year institution, as old and as solid as my marriage. She was my sister in all but name, the keeper of my secrets, the one person I could turn to for anything. She was a striking woman, a fiery, vivacious artist who had always been a thrilling counterpoint to my more reserved nature. She was the godmother to my daughter. She had held my hand through my mother's long illness, and I had held hers through a bitter, messy divorce. Our bond was, I believed, unbreakable. She found me by the fountain, her smile as bright as the diamond earrings that glittered at her ears. "Seraphina, you've outdone yourself," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5. "This is a fairy tale. Nia looks like a princess, and Harrison is as handsome as ever. You two are the gold standard, you know that? The rest of us are just playing for silver." "Stop it, you," I laughed, feeling a flush of pride. Her validation was a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. We stood together for a moment, watching the scene unfold, two women at the pinnacle of their lives, celebrating the success of the next generation. "It is perfect, isn't it?" I murmured, more to myself than to her. "Perfect," she agreed, her voice a little too tight. I glanced at her. A strange, fleeting expression crossed her face, a shadow of something I couldn't quite decipher, sadness, pity. Before I could ask, it was gone, replaced by her usual dazzling smile. "Come on," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Let's go congratulate the happy couple. And you need a glass of champagne. You're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." The irony of her words would only become clear later. At that moment, I just felt a surge of gratitude for her friendship. She was my rock. As we walked across the lawn together, I watched Harrison. He was now talking to another woman, a younger brunette I recognized as one of the junior partners from his firm. He had his back to us, but I could see the intent focus in his posture, the way he leaned in to hear her speak. Jocelyn's grip on my arm tightened for a fraction of a second. It was an almost imperceptible reaction, but I felt it. A tiny electric jolt of tension that shot up my arm. I looked at her again, but her face was a serene, smiling mask. Was I imagining things? Was the stress of the day making me paranoid, seeing shadows where there was only light? I told myself I was. I had to. To consider any other possibility was to contemplate a reality too monstrous to bear. I was standing in the most beautiful garden, surrounded by the people I loved most in the world. I was safe. I was loved. It was the lie I'd built my life on, and it was the lie I would cling to with white-knuckle desperation for a few more precious minutes. The ceremony was about to begin. The string quartet shifted from a lively Bach concerto to the soft, expectant notes of the bridal march. The guests found their seats, their faces turning toward the back of the lawn where a beautiful archway, woven with my own white roses, stood waiting. Harrison took his place at the front beside the groom, Caleb. He stood tall and proud, the very picture of the benevolent patriarch, a man content in his kingdom. He was a perfect, polished lie in a $500 suit. I stood at the back of the garden, my heart swelling with a bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for since the day Nia was born. She was about to step out of the house on my arm, and I was to walk her down the aisle to deliver her from her childhood into her future. It was the culmination of my life's work as a mother, a beautiful, painful, and necessary act of letting go. And then, as if on cue, the first tremor of the earthquake occurred. A young woman I barely knew, a cousin of one of the bridesmaids, approached me. She was slightly drunk, her face flushed with champagne and a strange, reckless bravado. "Mrs. Vance?" she slurred, her voice a little too loud. "Can I just say?" "You are an inspiration." "That's very kind of you," I said, taken aback. "No, I mean it," she insisted, leaning in conspiratorially, "to stand by your man through all of it. All of his indiscretions. You are a stronger woman than I am. A true class act." Her words didn't register at first. They were just a bizarre, drunken rambling. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, please," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Everyone knows about Harrison. It's practically a Charlotte legend, but you know what they say. What happens on the golf trips stays on the golf trips, right?" She winked at me, a grotesque, knowing gesture. And with that, she stumbled away, merging back into the crowd, leaving me frozen in place, her words echoing in the pristine, perfect air of my beautiful garden. Everyone knows about Harrison. The ground beneath my feet, the solid, dependable ground I had stood on for 40 years, suddenly felt like thin ice. The beautiful music, the smiling faces, the perfect roses, it all receded, replaced by a deafening, roaring silence in my own mind. I looked at my husband, standing at the altar, waiting for his daughter. And for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw a stranger with a secret life. And in that horrifying, world-shattering moment, the processional music swelled, the doors to the house opened, and my daughter, the radiant, innocent bride, stepped out and took my arm, ready for me to lead her into a future that I now knew was built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated lies. The first crack has appeared, a drunken whisper that threatens to bring down the entire cathedral of Seraphina's life. She is standing on the precipice, holding her daughter's arm, about to walk down the aisle into a future she now knows is a lie. What will she do? And who else in this perfect garden is a keeper of her husband's secrets? The ceremony is beginning, but the real drama is just about to explode. You must stay to find out what happens next. The world did not stop. The music did not falter. The smiling faces of my friends and family did not suddenly contort into masks of pity. The drunken girl's words, a grenade tossed casually into the pristine garden of my life, seemed to have exploded in a vacuum only I could perceive. Everyone knows about Harrison. The phrase was a virus, instantly infecting every thought, every perception. I looked out at the sea of 200 guests. People we had shared holidays with, whose children had grown up with mine. I no longer saw friends. I saw an audience. An audience that had been watching a 40-year play, knowing the lead actor was a fraud and I, the leading lady, was the only one who didn't know the script. The humiliation was a physical thing. A hot, creeping flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. A poison of shame. Mom? Nia's voice cut through the roaring in my ears. It's time. Are you okay? I looked at my daughter. My beautiful, radiant daughter. Her face was a perfect portrait of bridal anticipation, her eyes shining. Was she a part of it? Did she know? Was her blissful ignorance as much of a performance as my husband's fidelity? The thought was a fresh stab of a new, even more terrifying knife. I couldn't process it. I couldn't function. My mind had short-circuited. All I could do was perform the role that had been assigned to me, mother of the bride. I forced a smile onto my face, a brittle, cracking thing that felt like it was made of thin glass. Of course, sweetheart. Just a little emotional. You know, she bought it. Or she chose to. She squeezed my hand, her own excitement a blinding sun that left no room for the shadows in my eyes. I took her arm, the delicate lace of her sleeve rough against my skin, and we began the longest, most agonizing walk of my life. Every step down that rose-strewn aisle was a step deeper into the heart of the lie. The faces in the crowd blurred into a gallery of knowing smirks and pitying glances. Was I imagining it? Or had I just never known how to look before? I saw the wife of Harrison's law partner, a woman I played bridge with, give her husband a quick, subtle glance. I saw a group of women from the charity board I sat on whisper behind their hands as we passed. They weren't just watching a mother walk her daughter down the aisle. They were watching a fool. A celebrated, respected, high society fool. And the thought was so profoundly humiliating that my knees nearly buckled. I was a living tragedy, and everyone here had bought a ticket to the show. We reached the altar. The short walk felt like a pilgrimage across a desert of shame. Harrison stood waiting, his smile broad and proud. He looked from his daughter to me, and his eyes were filled with what I had, for 40 years, mistaken for love. Now, I saw it for what it was. The satisfied, proprietary look of a king surveying his beautiful, well-managed kingdom. He was proud of this day, proud of this perfect family, because it was the ultimate testament to the success of his deception. He was not just a philanderer, he was a master illusionist, and this wedding was his greatest trick. I placed Nia's hand into Caleb's. Caleb, the good, kind, unsuspecting groom. He looked at me, his eyes shining with tears of gratitude and joy. "Thank you, Seraphina," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The sincerity of it was a physical blow. I felt like a monster handing over this innocent lamb to a family of wolves. My hand trembled as I let go of my daughters, and I retreated to my seat in the front row, a place of honor that now felt like a defendant's chair at my own trial. I sat beside Jocelyn, my best friend, my rock. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You made it," she whispered, and got deep breaths. Her hand was cool, her grip firm and reassuring, but the casual gesture of comfort now felt tainted. Was she one of them? Was she one of the everyone who knew? Had our 40 years of friendship, of shared secrets and sisterly love also been a lie? I looked at her perfectly composed face, and searched for a crack in the facade. I found none. She was simply my friend, offering support. I had to believe that. To lose her on top of everything else would be an unsurvivable loss. The minister began to speak, his voice a rich, sonorous drone that faded in and out of my consciousness. He spoke of trust, of fidelity, of the sacred bond of honesty that forms the bedrock of a lasting marriage. Every word was a tiny, sharp stone being hurled at me. I sat there, trapped in the front row, a captive audience to the most grotesque and hypocritical performance I had ever witnessed. I scanned the faces of the women in the first few rows, the wives of Harrison's partners and colleagues, the prominent women of Charlotte society. There were perhaps 20 of them in our immediate circle. The drunken girl had said, indiscretions, plural. My mind, against my will, began a horrifying calculation. Which ones? The woman in the blue hat who had avoided my gaze? The one who had complimented Harrison a little too effusively during the cocktail hour? My world had become a gallery of suspects, and the man at the center of it all stood at the altar, beaming like a saint. The vows were exchanged in a blur. Nia's voice was clear and confident. Caleb's was thick with heartfelt emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, a roar of applause and cheers erupted from the crowd. It was a wave of joy that I could not feel, a sound from a distant, happier world. As Caleb and Nia shared their first kiss as a married couple, a kiss of pure, unadulterated hope on his part, and I now feared of triumphant acquisition on hers, the reality of my situation crashed down on me with new, terrifying force. This was no longer a secret I could quietly confront Harrison about later in the privacy of our home. A drunken girl had already proven that. The secret wasn't a secret at all. It was public knowledge, a story whispered at cocktail parties and on golf courses. It was my story, and I was the last to know. The ceremony concluded, and the reception began immediately on the great lawn. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet switched to a more upbeat, celebratory tune. The illusion of perfection was seamless. Harrison, ever the master of ceremonies, was the first to propose a toast. He raised his glass, his voice booming with paternal pride. He spoke of his love for his daughter, of his admiration for his new son-in-law. It was a beautiful speech, full of warmth and wit. It was also a complete and utter lie, and I had to stand there, a fixed, brittle smile on my face, and applaud with everyone else. Next came the maid of honor, Tiffany. Nia's best friend since childhood. She was a sweet girl, though prone to emotional, rambling speeches, especially after a few glasses of champagne. She took the microphone, her eyes already misty. To Nia and Caleb, she began. She spoke of their long friendship, of Nia's ambition and drive, and then, in a misguided, tipsy attempt to pay a compliment to the family matriarch, she lit the fuse on the bomb that would blow my world apart. I have to give a special shout out to Seraphina, she said, beaming at me. Nia learned from the best. How to be strong, how to be elegant, and how to handle a powerful, charismatic man. A few scattered, knowing chuckles rippled through a small segment of the crowd. Tiffany, oblivious, plowed ahead. I mean, let's be honest, we've all heard the stories about the legendary Harrison Vance, the King of Charlotte, she said with a playful wink. But Seraphina, you are the queen. You taught us all that true class is about knowing what's important and having the grace to overlook the rest, to discretion, a toast to the ultimate power couple. Tiffany's words fell into the crowd like a lit match into a room full of gasoline. A profound, echoing silence descended upon the garden. The music seemed to falter. The cheerful chatter ceased. In that one clumsy, catastrophic toast, she'd taken the private, whispered secret and dragged it into the harsh, public light of day. Everyone who knew shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces frozen in a mask of awkward horror. Everyone who didn't know was now looking around in a state of utter, bewildered confusion. My daughter Nia's radiant smile had frozen and shattered, her face paling to a ghostly white. Caleb looked at his new bride, then at Harrison, his expression one of pure, uncomprehending confusion. Harrison himself looked like he had been turned to stone. His charming patriarchal smile was a grotesque rictus, his eyes wide with a dawning animal panic. He had been exposed. But the final fatal blow was yet to come. From a table near the front, another woman stood up, a glass of champagne in her hand. It was Margaret, the wife of one of Harrison's oldest business rivals, a woman with whom I had always had a cool, competitive relationship. She had a sharp, cruel smile on her face, the smile of a predator that has just scented blood in the water. She saw her opening, a chance to settle a decade of perceived social slights, and she took it with savage glee. "Well," Margaret began, her voice cutting through the silence loud and clear for everyone to hear. "Since we're giving toast to discretion and overlooking things, I feel I simply must add one of my own." She turned her gaze with theatrical slowness to my husband. "A toast to Harrison Vance, a man so incredibly generous with his time, his charm, and his affections. His generosity has touched so many of us over the years. She let that poisonous phrase hang in the air, then turned her sharp, malicious gaze on the woman sitting next to me, my best friend, my sister, my rock. I'm sure I'm not the only woman here who can attest to that, Margaret continued, her voice dripping with venom. Isn't that right, Jocelyn? The world stopped. It was as if all the sound, all the air had been sucked out of my garden. I turned my head, a slow robotic movement, and looked at Jocelyn. My best friend of 40 years, her face was a ruin. The color had drained completely. Her mouth was hanging slightly open in a silent gasp, and her eyes were wide with the pure, unadulterated terror of a creature caught in the inescapable glare of a hunter's spotlight. There was no denial in her eyes, no confusion, only the horrifying, absolute, and undeniable confirmation of a betrayal so profound, so monstrous, that my mind simply refused, for a long, silent moment, to accept it. She was one of them. My sister, the keeper of my secrets. She was one of his women. The ground, which had been cracking all day, finally gave way completely, and I was plunged into a free fall of absolute world-ending darkness. The secret is no longer a whisper. It is a public indictment. Seraphina's worst fears have been confirmed in the most humiliating way imaginable, implicating not just her husband, but her closest friend. The perfect wedding is now the scene of a catastrophic implosion. What happens now? How does a woman react when her entire life is revealed to be a lie in front of 200 witnesses? The chaos is just beginning. The name Jocelyn hung in the air, a poisoned dart that had found its mark in the heart of our 40-year friendship. For a single eternal second, the world went silent and still. 200 guests, my husband, my daughter, and I, were all frozen in a single horrific tableau, our eyes fixed on the woman who had been my sister. Jocelyn's face was a crumbling ruin of shock and exposure. The blood had drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a sallow, waxy pallor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her denial wasn't just unconvincing, it was entirely absent. Her guilt was a physical presence, a foul odor that filled the space between us. Then, the spell broke. The silence was shattered by a collective gasp from the crowd, a sound like the sea pulling back before a tsunami. And in that moment of chaos, my own shock, the paralyzing, numbing fog that had enveloped me, began to recede, replaced by a glacial, terrifying clarity. The pieces of the puzzle, the little inconsistencies and strange moments I had polished away for years, now clicked into place with horrifying speed. Jocelyn's strange tension in her grip yesterday, her fleeting look of pity, the countless times she had defended Harrison's harmless flirting as just a part of his charm. It hadn't been friendship. It had been complicity. She hadn't been my confidant. She had been his co-conspirator. My first instinct was not to scream or to weep. It was a strange, cold, and utterly detached sense of purpose. My gaze shifted from Jocelyn's ruined face to Harrison. My husband. He was attempting to regain control, to play the part of the outraged host. "Margaret, you are drunk and behaving disgracefully," he boomed, his voice a theatrical performance of indignation. "How dare you come into my home and slander my wife's best friend? My wife's best friend." The words were a calculated deflection, a desperate attempt to frame this as an attack on Jocelyn and me, not on him. It was a brilliant, instinctive piece of manipulation, but it no longer worked. I saw the trick for what it was, and I would not allow it. Ignoring my husband, ignoring my daughter, ignoring the 200 pairs of eyes now fixed on me, I moved. My feet carried me across the grass, my movement steady and deliberate. I did not walk to Harrison. I did not walk to Jocelyn. I walked to the one person in this entire garden who was as much a victim as I was. I walked to Caleb, Nia's new husband, who was standing beside the altar, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending bewilderment. I reached him and placed a gentle hand on the arm of his tuxedo. He flinched slightly, his eyes wide and lost. I leaned in, my voice low but clear, meant only for him. "Caleb," I said, my heart aching for the pain I was about to confirm. "I am so, so deeply sorry. You are a good man, and you do not deserve any of this." This simple act, this small gesture of alliance with the other innocent party, was my declaration of war. I had chosen my side, and it was not with my husband. My public alignment with Caleb, the wronged groom, was a spark in the powder keg. The crowd, which had been frozen in shock, now erupted. The carefully constructed social order of our lives dissolved into chaos. People were standing up, whispering loudly, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid excitement. Nia, my daughter, finally broke out of her paralysis. Her first reaction was not to comfort her stunned and confused husband. Her first reaction was to manage the public relations crisis. She rushed over to me, her face a mask of furious desperation. "Mother, what are you doing?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Stop making a scene. Get back to your seat. You're embarrassing us, not, 'Mother, what is happening?' Not, 'Is this true?'" Her immediate concern was for appearances. Her perfect day, her perfect image, was being tarnished. And in her mind, my quiet act of solidarity with her husband was a greater crime than the decades of deceit that had led us to this moment. She saw the situation not as a moral catastrophe, but as a social faux pas. Harrison saw his opportunity. He strode over, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Seraphina, darling, you're in shock," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. He reached for my arm, attempting to steer me away from Caleb, to isolate me, to control the narrative. "Let's go inside. You shouldn't be out here. Margaret is a bitter woman. She's trying to hurt us." He was trying to cast me as the fragile, hysterical wife, overwhelmed by a vicious, baseless rumor. I have been a placid, accommodating woman for my entire life. I have smoothed over conflicts, soothed egos, and kept the peace at all costs. That woman died in the space of a single heartbeat. I yanked my arm out of his grasp with a violence that shocked him into silence. I turned to face him, my husband of 40 years, and I looked at him as if for the first time. "Don't," I said. My voice was not a shout, but it was colder and harder than any stone in my garden. "You ever touch me again." The public rejection, the physical recoiling from his touch, was an undeniable act of condemnation. A fresh wave of gasps rippled through the guests. I had not just refused his comfort, I had confirmed the accusation. I had, in that moment, publicly divorced myself from his lie, and by extension from him. The battle lines were drawn, not in private, but here, on the blood-soaked grass of my beautiful, ruined garden. Margaret's accusation had broken the dam of polite society. The secrets and whispers that had been contained for years now came rushing out in a devastating, chaotic flood. A woman whose husband had worked with Harrison for 20 years suddenly burst into tears, turning on her own spouse. "You knew," she shrieked, her voice cracking with betrayal. "You knew and you never told me. You let me have them over for dinner. You let that woman," she pointed a trembling finger at Jocelyn, "hold my baby." The accusation had a domino effect. The woman Harrison had been speaking with earlier, the junior partner from his firm, was now being stared at. She turned bright red and quickly began to push her way through the crowd, desperate to escape. Another woman, the wife of our neighbor, a quiet woman I had always liked, caught my eye. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a deep, profound guilt. She took a hesitant step toward me. "Seraphina," she whispered, her voice choked. "I'm so sorry. He told me you two had an arrangement, that you knew, that it was open, an arrangement." The lie was so insidious, so perfectly crafted to absolve them of their guilt and paint me as a willing, complicit participant in my own humiliation. My mind was reeling, trying to process the sheer scale of the deception. It wasn't just a few sordid affairs, it was a lifestyle, a network of lies and complicity that had been flourishing just beneath the surface of my perfect life. How many? How many of these women, these friends, had shared my husband? The drunken girl's words came back to me, a Charlotte legend. And then the final unthinkable betrayal was confirmed. Jocelyn, my best friend, was now being confronted by her own ex-husband, who was in attendance with his new wife. "Is this what it was about, Jocelyn?" he demanded, his voice shaking with a decade of unresolved anger. "Was it him? Was our entire marriage a lie because you were sleeping with Harrison Vance?" Jocelyn didn't answer. She just stood there, weeping, the silent confession hanging in the air. My best friend. The woman who had advised me on my marriage, who had listened to my fears and dreams, she had not been my friend. She had been my husband's mistress, a spy in my own home, her every gesture of affection a profound and sickening betrayal. The number from the prompt echoed in my head, a horrifying whispered truth. 7 of the 20 women present. I looked around the garden, at the familiar faces, and felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. This was not my community. This was Harrison's hunting ground. And I had been the oblivious gamekeeper. The party was over. What had been a joyous wedding just an hour ago was now a scene of mass exodus, a social shipwreck from which guests were fleeing as if it were sinking. They left in a hurry, avoiding my eyes, desperate to escape the profound, uncomfortable ugliness of the truth. The beautiful garden was now a wasteland, strewn with the debris of a life that had just been publicly detonated. In the midst of the wreckage, only the key players remained. Me, Harrison, a hysterical Nia, a catatonic Caleb, and a weeping, broken Jocelyn. The 5 of us were a tableau of human misery, standing in a circle of accusation and shame. Jocelyn finally found her voice, her words a pathetic, choked whisper. "Seraphina, Ellie, please," she begged, taking a step toward me. "It wasn't. I never meant to hurt you." It was a long time ago. It was a mistake. "A mistake," I repeated, my voice a dead, hollow thing. "A 10-year mistake? A 40-year lie?" I looked at the woman who had been my sister, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a vast, cold emptiness. The love and trust I had for her had been so completely annihilated that not even ashes remained. "There is nothing you can say," I told her, and the finality in my voice made her flinch as if I had struck her. Nia, my daughter, still hadn't directed a single ounce of her anger at the man who had actually committed the sins. Her fury was reserved for the collateral damage, for the public humiliation. "This is a nightmare," she sobbed, glaring at me. "Our wedding. Our family. You just stood there and let it all happen. You let them ruin everything." Her inability to see the truth, her reflexive need to blame anyone but her perfect father, was perhaps the most painful cut of all. Harrison, his face pale and his authority in tatters, tried one last time to take control. "That's enough," he said, his voice a weak imitation of its usual command. "We will sort this out. In private," but there was nothing left to sort out. The truth was out, bloody and screaming for all to see. I turned my back on all of them, on the weeping mistress who had been my best friend, on the hysterical daughter who valued appearances over truth, and on the hollow man who had been my husband. I walked across the lawn, my steps steady, my back straight. I walked into the house, my beautiful house, the monument to my life's great lie, and I closed the heavy oak door behind me, shutting them all out. I was alone in the silent, empty house, but for the first time in 40 years, I was no longer a fool. The illusion was gone, and I was finally, terribly free. The explosion has happened, and the survivors are left standing in the rubble. Seraphina has walled herself off, but the battle is far from over. Now that the lies are exposed, the real fight for the future begins. What will Harrison do now that his kingdom of deceit has crumbled? And what will Seraphina, a woman who has lost everything she thought was real, do with her newfound terrible freedom? The choices made in the next 24 hours will be the most important of her life. I closed the heavy oak door, the sound echoing the final definitive end of my life as I had known it. The chaos of the garden was on the other side of that door. Inside the house, a new kind of silence descended, heavier and more profound than any I had ever known. It was the silence of a tomb, the silence of a world that had just ended. I walked through the grand foyer, past the sweeping staircase and the family portraits that now seemed like cruel, mocking parodies. There we were, the Vances, frozen in time on the walls. Harrison, the handsome, loving patriarch. Nia, the bright, adoring daughter. And me, Seraphina, the smiling, serene matriarch. The keeper of a home I now realized was nothing more than a beautifully decorated theater for a one-woman show of which I was the unwitting star. I felt a strange, unnerving sense of detachment, as if I were floating above my own body, watching a character in a tragedy. The overwhelming, soul-crushing pain was there, a vast black ocean beneath the surface, but a layer of protective ice had formed over it. A chilling, functional calm that was my mind's last defense against utter madness. I was not crying. The time for tears felt a world away. A luxury for a woman who still had something left to mourn. I had lost everything so completely, so catastrophically, that grief was too small a word for it. Methodically, I began to walk through the downstairs rooms. I touched the back of a silk-upholstered chair we had bought in Italy. I ran my fingers over the cool, smooth surface of the grand piano Harrison had given me for my 50th birthday. I looked at the collection of silver picture frames on the mantelpiece, each one holding a captured moment of a lie. Every object in this house, every piece of furniture, every memory had been retroactively poisoned. They were no longer symbols of a shared life, but artifacts of a masterful deception. I went upstairs to our bedroom, the sanctuary where I had slept beside a stranger for 40 years. I walked past the guest rooms where our friends, his mistresses, had stayed. I walked past Nia's childhood bedroom, a place I could not bring myself to look into. I entered my own room, and with a quiet, definitive click, I locked the door. I was creating a fortress, a single, defensible space in a home that had become enemy territory. And from within the walls of this fortress, I began to prepare for the war that was to come. I opened my closet, a space filled with the beautiful clothes of a life I no longer lived, and I pulled out a small leather overnight bag. My movements were not frantic or panicked. They were calm, measured, and deliberate. I was a soldier, methodically packing a go bag, preparing for a long and brutal campaign. I was no longer the victim of this story. I was about to become its architect. An hour passed. The sounds from outside had faded as the last of the guests and caterers had fled the scene of the disaster. The house was now quiet, but I knew I was not alone. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs, then the soft tread on the runner in the hallway. He stopped outside my bedroom door. For a long moment, there was only silence. He was gathering himself, formulating a strategy, deciding which mask to wear now that his primary one had been ripped away. The doorknob rattled. He had tried to enter, assuming, as he always had, that no door in this house was ever truly closed to him. When he found it locked, there was another pause. "Seraphina?" he called out, his voice a careful, gentle thing. It was his concerned husband voice, the one he used when I was sick or upset. The sound of it, once a comfort, now made my skin crawl. I did not answer. I continued to fold a silk blouse, placing it neatly in my bag. "Seraphina, please open the door," he said, his voice a little more strained now. "We need to talk about this. What Margaret did was unforgivable. She's a bitter, vicious woman. And Jocelyn? She made a terrible mistake years ago after her divorce. It was a moment of weakness for both of us. It meant nothing. His words were a master class in his particular brand of poison. He was minimizing, rationalizing, attempting to shrink his mountain of betrayals down to a manageable molehill. He was framing it as two isolated incidents, a drunken outburst from a rival and a single, long-ago mistake with a vulnerable friend. He was trying to contain the fire, to convince me that the house was not burning down, that it was merely a small kitchen fire we could easily extinguish together. He still believed he could manage me, that he could talk his way out of the apocalypse. From my side of the door, I spoke for the first time. My voice was a dead, flat thing, devoid of the emotion he was trying to manipulate. "There is nothing to talk about, Harrison," I said. "The 40 years we had were a lie. I am not interested in a guided tour of your betrayals." "That's not true, and you know it," he insisted, his voice rising, the frustration beginning to crack his calm facade. "We had a good life. We have a beautiful daughter. Are you going to throw all of that away because of a few stupid, meaningless mistakes?" Mistakes. The word was so small, so inadequate for the continental scale of his deceit. He wasn't a man confessing a sin. He was a CEO negotiating the terms of a minor corporate error. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that he felt no remorse. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was only sorry that he had been caught. My refusal to open the door, my refusal to even engage in his twisted version of a debate was a profound and radical shift in our 40-year power dynamic. For the first time, I was denying him access. I was refusing to let him into the narrative to control it. The door would remain locked. Later that evening, after the siege on my bedroom door had ended in his frustrated retreat, my phone began to ring. The screen lit up with a name that, just yesterday, had been a source of immediate comfort and now was a symbol of the deepest betrayal imaginable. Jocelyn. I stared at the phone, a cold, clinical curiosity overriding my initial instinct to smash it against the wall. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the sound of the lie, the excuses, the performance. I answered the call and said nothing, holding the phone to my ear in the silent, darkened room. "Seraphina!" "Oh, thank God," you answered. Her voice was a wreck, a thick, sobbing mess of manufactured hysteria and genuine panic. "Ellie, please, you have to listen to me. Please, just let me explain." I remained silent. I was a stone wall, an empty vessel for her to pour her poison into. "It was after my divorce," she began, the words tumbling out in a frantic, rehearsed rush. "I was a mess, you know I was. I was lonely. I was drinking too much. Harrison. He was just being a friend. He was being supportive. And one night, it happened. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and it meant nothing. I swear to you, it meant nothing. He was just being kind. Kind. The word was a profanity. My husband's kindness was to sleep with my best friend in the wreckage of her own marriage. The lie was so audacious, so insulting to my intelligence that I felt a flicker of something other than pain, a cold, contemptuous anger. "It was years ago, Ellie," she continued, her sobs punctuating every sentence. "It was over so quickly. But I was trapped. He said it was better if you didn't know, that it would only hurt you. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but I was a coward. But our friendship, Ellie, our friendship is real. That was real. 40 years. Please don't throw away 40 years for one stupid, meaningless mistake. You're my sister. I love you." I had listened to her entire performance without making a sound. The lies, the half-truths, the pathetic attempt to frame herself as a victim of Harrison's kindness. And when she was finally done, her pathetic plea for our sisterhood hanging in the air, I finally spoke. My voice was not filled with rage or sadness. It was the calm, detached voice of a judge delivering a final, irrevocable sentence. "A mistake," I said. "Margaret's toast mentioned a decade of generosity. The woman at the party told me my husband's affairs are a Charlotte legend. This wasn't a single mistake, Jocelyn. It was a career, and you weren't a victim. You were his accomplice." I took a breath. "You say our friendship was real? For 40 years you have sat in my home, you have eaten at my table, you have held my hand and listened to my deepest fears, all while knowing this. That wasn't a friendship. It was an infiltration. You were never my friend. You were his spy. A choked, strangled sound came from her end of the line. Seraphina, no. Goodbye, Jocelyn, I said, and I hung up the phone. Then, with a few calm, deliberate taps on the screen, I blocked her number, erasing 40 years of my life as easily as deleting a contact. The silence that followed that phone call was different. It was the silence of a battlefield after the last enemy has been vanquished. I had locked out my husband. I had executed my best friend. The two central pillars of my life, both rotten to the core, had been torn down. I was now standing alone in the ruins, but I was standing. The house was quiet. I knew Harrison was downstairs, likely in his study, drinking himself into a stupor, trying to figure out his next move, furious that his usual tactics of charm and manipulation had failed. I finished packing my bag. It contained only the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, my passport, my personal bank documents. I zipped it shut, the sound loud and final in the quiet room. Then I unlocked the bedroom door. I walked down the grand staircase, my steps sure and steady. I did not feel like a victim fleeing a burning house. I felt like a queen abdicating a corrupt and hollow throne. Harrison must have heard me. He emerged from his study as I reached the bottom of the stairs. He looked haggard, his perfect tuxedo now rumpled, his face pale and drawn. He saw the bag in my hand, and a flicker of genuine, panicked fear crossed his face for the first time. The queen was not just leaving the room, she was leaving the castle. "Seraphina," he said, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" I stopped at the front door and turned to face him one last time. I looked at this man, this stranger I had shared a bed and a life with, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold distance. The love I had for him had been so completely and utterly annihilated that not even hatred remained. There was only the cold, hard fact of his betrayal. "I am going to a hotel," I said, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. "On Monday morning, I will be retaining the services of the best divorce attorney in this city. From this moment on, all communication between us will be through our legal counsel. Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not contact me directly in any way ever again." He stared at me, speechless. He had been prepared for tears, for arguments, for a dramatic, emotional scene that he could manage and control. He was not prepared for this. He was not prepared for the calm, efficient execution of our marriage. He was not prepared for me to take absolute unilateral control. You're leaving?" he stammered, as if the concept were foreign. "I have already left, Harrison," I replied. "This is just the paperwork." And with that, I turned, opened the front door, and walked out into the cool night air. I did not look back. I left behind the beautiful house, the ruined garden, the stunned, broken man, and the entire 40-year lie of my life. I was walking into a future that was terrifying and unknown, but for the first time, it was honest. And it was mine. Seraphina has left the building. The illusion is shattered and the power dynamic has been irrevocably inverted. She is no longer a victim. She is a woman in control, armed with the terrible, liberating truth. Harrison is left alone in the ruins of his secret kingdom. The final chapter will explore the fallout of this Declaration of Independence, the legal and emotional war that is to come, and what it truly means to rebuild a life from the ashes of a great betrayal. Monday morning arrived, not with the chaos and despair I had anticipated, but with the cold, clear light of purpose. I awoke in the anonymous luxury of a hotel suite, a refugee in silk sheets, but for the first time in my adult life, I felt like the sole sovereign of my own existence. The shock and grief were still there, a vast black ocean beneath me, but I was no longer drowning in it. I was navigating it, my course set by a new, unshakable North Star. the truth. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in the office of Eleanor Mayhew, a woman whose reputation as the most formidable divorce attorney in Charlotte was whispered with equal parts terror and reverence. She was a woman in her 70s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a demeanor that conveyed both profound empathy and an absolute intolerance for nonsense. I told her everything. I did not weep or rage. I laid out the facts of my 40-year marriage and its spectacular public demise with the cool, detached precision of a historian, recounting a significant but distant event. I spoke of the drunken girl's confession, the toasts, the public shaming of Jocelyn, and the final quiet implosion of my family. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her gaze steady on my face. "Seraphina," she said, her voice a firm, reassuring alto, "you have endured a trial by fire. Most women would be in a state of collapse. You, however, are not here for a shoulder to cry on. You are here for ammunition." "I am here for justice," I corrected her gently. A slow, appreciative smile spread across her face. "That's even better," she said. "Justice is far more satisfying." She then walked me through the brutal architecture of divorce. She explained that in North Carolina, the law of equitable distribution would be our guide. Harrison's decades of infidelity, while emotionally catastrophic, were not the primary legal weapon. The true weapon, she explained, was his financial deceit. "He didn't just cheat on you, my dear," Eleanor said, her eyes glinting with a warrior's light. "He cheated with you. With your shared marital funds. He financed his secret life with your money. Our job is to conduct a full forensic accounting to trace every dollar he siphoned from your shared enterprise to fund his hobbies. We will not just be dividing the assets. We will be clawing back every cent he stole. The plan was a balm to my wounded soul. This was not about vengeance. It was about reclamation. It was about taking back the tangible parts of a life I had invested everything in. As I sat in her office, I felt the last vestiges of the frightened, humiliated wife fall away, replaced by the quiet, resolute strength of a woman who was about to dismantle an empire and reclaim her own. While I was with Eleanor, she made the first call. She put it on speakerphone. She called Harrison's office, was put through to his personal assistant, and in a voice as smooth and cold as steel, she announced, "This is Eleanor Mayhew. Please inform Mr. Vance that I am now representing his wife, Seraphina Vance, in the matter of their dissolution of marriage. You can expect to be served with the official papers within the hour." The battle had officially and irrevocably begun. The weeks that followed were a brutal education in the unraveling of a king. Harrison, a man accustomed to controlling every narrative, every outcome, suddenly found himself in a story he could not command. The news of our separation and the scandalous reasons for it tore through the tight-knit, gossipy world of Charlotte society like a wildfire. The Charlotte legend was no longer a subject of amused, whispered admiration. It was a public disgrace. The fallout was swift and merciless. He was quietly asked to step down from the board of the city's most prestigious arts foundation, a position he had held for 2 decades. Longtime business partners became distant, their conversations suddenly clipped and formal. The invitations to the exclusive golf tournaments and charity galas that had been the bedrock of his social life simply stopped coming. His kingdom, built on the carefully crafted illusion of integrity and family values, was crumbling, and there was nothing his charm or money could do to stop it. Meanwhile, Eleanor Mayhew's team of forensic accountants descended upon our 40 years of financial history. They were like archaeologists, digging through layers of statements and accounts, unearthing the fossil record of my husband's secret life. The report, when it was finally compiled, was a document of breathtaking deceit. It detailed hundreds of thousands of dollars of marital funds funneled into hidden credit cards and accounts. It was an atlas of his betrayals. Luxury hotel suites in New York, private ski chalets in Aspen, expensive jewelry from boutiques I had never heard of, and even, most gallingly, regular tuition payments for a private school in a neighboring county. The last entry was a particular cruelty, a quiet, devastating confirmation that this was not just about infidelity, but about a whole other family, a secret life complete with a child hidden in plain sight. During this time, Nia was caught in the crossfire. The scandal had tainted her as well. The story of her ruined wedding and her infamous father, a subject of gossip in her own professional circles. She tried to act as a mediator, calling me with desperate, pleading appeals. "Mother, can't you just be reasonable?" she begged. "You're destroying him. You're destroying everything. Can't you just handle this quietly, for the sake of the family?" "Nia," I had replied, my voice calm but unyielding. "Your father destroyed the family. He did it quietly, for decades, right under our noses. I am simply turning on the lights so we can all see the truth of the damage. This is not about revenge. This is about justice." It was a conversation we would have many times, her loyalty to the father she had idolized, warring with the undeniable, ugly facts of his behavior. The final settlement conference took place not in a courtroom, but in the sterile, impersonal environment of a mediator's office. Harrison looked like a man who had aged 10 years and 3 months. His confident, commanding presence was gone, replaced by a gray, weary resignation. He sat beside his lawyer, a man who looked equally exhausted. They had seen the forensic accounting report. They knew there was no defense. Eleanor Mayhew was magnificent. She didn't argue or attack. She simply presented the evidence, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, a cold, irrefutable mountain of financial infidelity. When she was done, she named our price. She was not asking for the standard 50%. She was demanding the return of every documented dollar Harrison had spent on his affairs, plus a majority share of the remaining assets, as punitive compensation for decades of financial and emotional fraud. Harrison's lawyer began to bluster about legal precedent, but Eleanor cut him off with a single icy stare. "Your client can either agree to these terms," she said, "or we will proceed to a public trial. And I can assure you the discovery process will be exhaustive. Every woman, every hotel bill, every secret child will become a matter of public record. It is your choice." Harrison, broken, finally spoke. "I'll sign," he whispered. Part of the settlement was the immediate sale of the house. Our beautiful Tudor home, the stage for our entire life, was to be sold. Its contents divided. It was a final, symbolic death. The garden I had poured my heart into would belong to strangers. The thought was painful, but also liberating. It was a necessary amputation to save my own life. After it was all over, I met with Nia for coffee. She was quiet, her usual bubbly confidence gone. "He agreed to everything," she said, staring into her cup. "He's lost almost all of it. The house, his reputation, most of his money." "He didn't lose it, Nia," I said gently. "He spent it. Over 30 years on a life he kept hidden from us." She looked up, her eyes filled with tears for the first time. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it." It was the beginning of an apology, the first crack in the wall of her denial. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Your father built his entire world on a lie, sweetheart," I told her. "I am going to build my new world on the truth. It will be smaller, and it won't be as shiny, but it will be real, and you will always have a place in it, if you decide that's the world you want to live in, too." The choice, I knew, had to be hers. 2 years have passed. The old house was sold to a young family with noisy, happy children. Harrison, I am told, lives a quieter, smaller life now, a pariah in the city that once celebrated him. I have no contact with him, and I feel no desire for it. He is a ghost from a life that no longer belongs to me. My new life is my own creation. I live in a modern, light-filled condominium in the heart of the city, with a panoramic view of the skyline. The space is uncluttered, filled with art that I love and books that I've always meant to read. It is a space that reflects me and me alone. I have reconnected with the friends who were true, and I have found a new community in the art classes I have started taking. My hands, which once tended roses, now learning to shape clay, to create something new from a formless lump. On my balcony, I have a small garden. It is not the grand manicured masterpiece of my former life. It is a collection of pots filled with resilient, sometimes chaotic herbs and wildflowers. It is smaller, a bit wilder, and it requires my attention every day. But it is honest, and it is entirely mine. Nia and I are slowly, cautiously rebuilding. She is still married to Caleb, a man whose grace and forgiveness are a constant source of wonder to me. They are building their own life, a quieter, more modest one than she had planned, but one built on the hard-won foundation of truth. She calls me every Sunday. We are finding our way back to each other, not as the mother and daughter from the old story, but as two women who survived an earthquake and are now carefully navigating the new, altered landscape. Sometimes, as I sit on my balcony in the evening, watching the city lights begin to glitter, I think about the woman I used to be, the smiling, oblivious queen of the perfect garden. I do not miss her. I do not pity her. I understand that the life she had, the life I thought was perfect, was a gilded cage, comfortable and beautiful, but a prison nonetheless. The destruction of my marriage was not the end of my life. It was a violent, painful, and absolutely necessary liberation. I lost the world I thought I wanted, but in the ruins, I finally found myself. And the peace that comes with that discovery is more precious than anything I ever thought I had lost.